nationally and internationally. He was a co-founder of Thousand Friends and these webinars free of charge and offer professional certification credits thanks to our generous sponsors. I'd like to acknowledge and thank our supporters listed here on the screen. Robert L. Parks, Susan Trebarthen, Kimberly A. DeGrove and Clyde Parton, Dickman Law Firm, Richard Levy, Levy Consulting, Robert M. Rhodes, Thomas Baird, Ned and Carolyn Cooper, William DeGrove, Vivian Handy, Jim Nicholas, Nancy Stroud, Laura Lee Thompson. And a big thank you to the supporters and sponsors of our anniversary club, our supporters. Thank you to all. We could not do these webinars without your support. For those seeking professional or continuing education credits, this event has been approved for credits for planners, Florida attorneys, and certified floodplain managers. The slide shown on your screen includes the course credit numbers for each profession and will be made available following the broadcast on our website. Following the webinar, you will receive an email with a link to a short survey that will help us improve our webinars. Certificates of attendance will be emailed to you within 2 business days of the webinar. And if you don't receive your certificate or if you encounter any other issues, please email me at friends@1000fof.org to receive your certificate. Credit information will also be posted on our website under the webinar tab. We will have time for questions and answers at the end of the webinar. Please submit your questions for speakers using that Q&A button on your Zoom control panel. And a reminder for questions, please keep them as succinct as possible, and where it's appropriate, indicate to me which presenter you'd like to address the question. All right, with that, I'd like to introduce today's presenters. I'm pleased to introduce Paul Owens, President of Thousand Friends of Florida. Paul works with our board of directors to advance the organization's policies and programs. Before joining with Thousand Friends in 2018, he spent more than 15 years at the Orlando Sentinel, including serving as opinions editor, where he wrote extensively on growth management, environmental policy, and quality of life issues across Florida.
There were a few things that...
Next, I'm pleased to introduce Kimberly Dinkins, Policy and Planning Director at 1000 Friends of Florida. Kim works with citizens and advocates before the Florida legislature to advance sound community planning that protects Florida's lands, waters, and quality of life. She brings more than 15 years of experience in natural resource policy and management across state and local government and conservation organizations. Finally, I'm pleased to introduce Chadwick Leonard, Conservation and Planning Advocacy Coordinator at 1000 Friends of Florida. Chad tracks and analyzes state and local policy proposals affecting community planning and conservation, and he works closely with policymakers, grassroots advocates, and partner organizations to advance smart growth and public participation in planning decisions.
It's a day. I'm having a day, man.
With that, I'd like to turn the presentation over to Paul. Paul, the floor is yours.
You swallowed it.
Probably. It's just not there anymore. I was like,
Oh, no.
something feels different back there. I'm like, oh,
It's not good.
it's gone.
Great, your screen is showing. You are still muted.
Okay, are we looking now?
Looks great, thank you.
Okay, welcome everyone. So we are now at the halfway point in the 2026 regular session of the Florida legislature. And I stress regular because last year the session ended up running 45 days extra after the House and Senate deadlocked over the budget. As I get started on this overview, I want to make clear that 1000 Friends of Florida is primarily focused on land use policy. I'm talking about other issues because lawmakers' time and attention is not unlimited, and the Capitol is not a vacuum. The degree to which lawmakers focus on those other issues will impact how much energy is left in the two chambers to dedicate to our priorities and anyone else's. So last week, the Senate Appropriations Chair, Ed Hooper, said on the Senate floor that he and his House counterpart, Lawrence McClure, were having constructive discussions, but the Senate would be delaying the release of its budget a week to synchronize with the House's delayed release. McClure responded with a critical message on social media, blaming the Senate for the delay. Whichever chamber is to blame, I won't be able to summarize the proposed budgets today, something I normally do in these legislative updates. But even if the bottom lines in the two competing budgets are closer than last year's initial $4 billion difference, there are other issues on which the two chambers aren't seeing eye to eye. Legislators are already scheduled to spend extra time in the Capitol after the end of this year's regular session for a special session that the governor has called to redraw the state's congressional district lines. A House committee has been meeting on redistricting, but there has been no counterpart in the Senate. Another issue currently under discussion in the House that could wind up in a special session is property tax cuts, a priority that Governor DeSantis began pushing last year. The House has convened a select committee on the subject and generated more than a half dozen proposals. Last week, the chairman of the House committee said he expects the proposals to be combined into one or two measures for voters to consider in November. Senate leaders and the governor have said they would prefer to take the issue up in a special session. Whenever it happens, if 3/5 of the members in both chambers agree on one or more proposals for the November ballot, they don't need a signature from the governor. But neither the governor nor the Senate have produced their own proposals yet. Whatever might ultimately emerge is going to face strong pushback led by local governments whose revenues to pay for public services would be slashed under the House proposals. Tax cuts also would sharply reduce funding for regional water management districts.
Just outsource police to.
Our last webinar came 6 days before the opening day of the 2026 session on Tuesday, January 13th, when the governor and the two presiding officers delivered their opening day speeches and laid out their agendas. So we'll take a quick look back at the speeches that day. First, the governor. He spent much of his speech, his last State of the State, recounting his accomplishments over his two terms as if he was polishing his resume for a future political campaign. Then looking ahead, he reiterated his support for cutting property taxes, though he didn't provide details. Some of the policy priorities he did mention included controls on artificial intelligence, further limits on illegal immigration, and Senate President Ben Albritton's Rural Renaissance package of assistance for Florida's rural counties, which passed the Senate but died in the House last year.
Yeah, like I don't get why you
In
can't have a
his
rifle
speech,
if
the
you're,
Senate
like,
president also spent some time looking back.
someone like, then you're not allowed to
When
have
he
a rifle.
pivoted to the upcoming session, he promised to pursue his Rural Renaissance bill, which has since passed the Senate. He also expressed support, but without details, for measures to address affordability and for a fiscally conservative state budget. But this past week, he ruled out any further action to regulate insurance, which is a key element of Democrats' affordability focus.
Well, you could until he's.
In his brief speech, House Speaker Danny Perez laid out his priorities in a single paragraph without delving into details. Affordability and insurance, taxes in the economy, prescription drug prices, putting the brakes on the rising cost of public benefits, space industry leadership, and infrastructure to keep up with growth. He declared, "We work together and we find our way through."
Hard isn't an excuse.
but not everybody in Tallahassee might want to work together. There are hard feelings looming over this session from last year when the governor and the speaker clashed over tax policy and the House conducted an investigation into the finances of the First Lady's signature Hope Florida program. It's worth noting that on the day the governor delivered his speech, he shook hands with President Albritton, but not Speaker Perez. It was the snub seen round the state, as well as throughout the Capitol. The apparent antipathy between the governor and the speaker could impact what gets done this session, whether the session concludes on time, and what ends up surviving the governor's veto pen. There's also some doubt about the willingness of Senate and House leaders to work together. At this point in the session, there's still not much overlap between what the two chambers have prioritized. The Senate has passed 25 bills, but the House hasn't taken up any of them yet. The House has passed 24 bills, but the Senate isn't acting on them. The two chambers for now are operating in their own silos. Remember that both houses have to pass measures in order for them to be sent to the governor's desk. In a bicameral legislature, it takes two to tango. So we could see a shorter list of bills passed by the time the regular session concludes. Here's a reminder and a reality check. Democrats may have different priorities than the Republicans in the legislature, but whatever happens in the Capitol this session will be determined by Republicans. The party maintains a supermajority in both chambers. Democrats can wage a rhetorical campaign for their priorities when speaking in committee meetings and on the floor, but they don't have the numbers to stop the bills they oppose. It's rare that rank and file Republicans break with their party leaders and vote with Democrats. The delay of budget drafts from the Senate and the House means that negotiators from the two chambers will have less time to work out the inevitable differences. Disputes at the subcommittee level will get bumped up to the committee level or to the presiding officers sooner for resolution. And the absence of allocations for now leaves a number of questions that are of particular interest to 1,000 Friends and our priorities. How much will the two chambers propose spending on land conservation? Last week, the Florida Wildlife Corridor Foundation released the results of a Mason-Dixon poll it commissioned, showing that 89% of Floridians favored spending at least $100 million a year on Florida Forever, the state's premier land conservation program. The governor proposed $115 million in his budget. The final budget approved last year, however, allocated just $18 million for Florida Forever, with House leaders arguing there was enough money left over in the program from prior years. However, this year the program is all but out of money. Last year, the legislature allocated $250 million for the Rural and Family Lands Protection Program, which buys development rights from farmers and ranchers to keep land in production. The governor has proposed $200 million in the program for next year. The governor has also proposed $15 million each for the Florida Communities Trust and the Florida Recreational Development Assistance Programs, two local grant programs aimed at expanding parks and recreation spaces. Last year, the legislature zeroed out funding for both. Another important question is how much will be proposed for spending on restoration for the Everglades, the Indian River Lagoon, and natural springs, and how much on water quality projects throughout the state. Everglades restoration has been well funded under Governor DeSantis, and additional money has been put into the lagoon in recent years at his initiative. Springs, however, have mostly received the bare $50 million annual minimum required under state law. The governor has proposed a total of $1.4 billion for restoration and water quality next year. Another lingering question: how much will be spent on community resilience grants for projects and planning? The governor has proposed $208 million next year. The legislature has generally supported this priority.
So every city gets,
How much will be spent on affordable housing? The governor, to his credit, has proposed full funding from the state's affordable housing trust funds every year of his 2 terms. The legislature has responded with full funding for the past 5 years. Full funding next year would come in at just under $450 million. We may know the totals in the House and Senate budgets as soon as tomorrow, the proposed totals, but we won't know the final figures into the middle of next month at the earliest. In a budget that exceeds $100 billion, it's hard to gauge spending levels on individual programs. $1 million sounds like a lot of money. So here's some perspective. The governor's $115 million proposal for Florida Forever represents about 0.1% of the state budget, a penny for every $10 in state spending. That's a down payment on a multi-billion-dollar project. There are still nearly 8 million acres of unprotected high-priority natural land in the Florida Wildlife Corridor. In the last webinar, I also highlighted these details on the state's budget outlook for the next 3 years. A surplus next year, followed by deepening deficits in the following 2 years. There's an update since then. Last month, the state's economists added just over $500 million to their projection for tax revenues in the current fiscal year and $70 million for next year, giving lawmakers more than $500 million extra to work with. So far, the projections for future deficits haven't changed, but stay tuned. Now here's the time when I briefly remind everyone how 1000 Friends chooses the bills that we track during legislative session. This is a perfect time for a coffee or a bathroom break if you've heard this before. We're community planning advocates, so legislation in that area will always be our top priority for attention and action. That includes bills and budgeting that deal with affordable housing, a vital part of well-planned, vibrant communities. We also monitor bills that deal with land and water protection as well as community resilience when there's a nexus between them and land use planning. We keep track of bills that address major transportation policies because transportation modes and routes in Florida often drive land use and development. Finally, we follow legislation that impacts local government home rule authority on planning, resilience, housing, conservation, and transportation. We take positions on bills with the review and approval of the Legislative Affairs Committee on our Board of Directors, and we don't take positions on every bill that we follow. Some bills don't directly address our core mission. Some are local bills that are specific to issues in one community or one county. Some are mixed bags containing some provisions we support and some we oppose. If we do take a position, that position is subject to change if the bill changes. And now hear this. If we don't track a bill or we track it without taking a position, that does not amount to support for the bill. With that, I'll turn the program to Kim, who will start by discussing our top priority community planning bills.
All right, thank you, Paul. We're ready to go. Hi, everybody. As always, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. The same as a month ago, I'll be going over the main community planning, water resource, and resilience bills that we're monitoring. Chad Leonard will be handling the affordable housing and transportation bills, and then Paul is going to rejoin us towards the end to talk about our land conservation bills. If you recall, we started the session by monitoring more than 100 bills. That number has grown and shifted, so we're going to hit the highlights today and let you know about a few that aren't really gaining any traction so far. Beginning again with the major growth management bill that we've discussed from last year a lot is Senate Bill 180. Our main effort over the summer was to raise awareness about the detrimental impact of the retroactive and prospective prohibitions on land use regulations that were included in Senate Bill 180 and ask legislators to take action. You all wrote letters, responded to action alerts, and testified at legislative delegation meetings throughout the state. In many cases, legislators acknowledged that they were hearing you, and some even pledged to do something about it.
Then they didn't.
The closest bill that we have to a full repeal of those sections in Senate Bill 180 that we were concerned about is Senate Bill 840, filed by Senator DeSigley from Pinellas County, who was also last year's sponsor. For the forward-looking provisions, this bill reduces the definition of impacted local governments from within 100 miles of a federal disaster zone to 50 miles. And rather than a full prohibition on any more restrictive or burdensome regulations, policies, or procedures, it restricts only regulations that would delay hurricane-related repairs or construction or reconstruction. It doesn't prohibit adoption, but does prohibit enforcement of certain regulations and moratoria. It also allows local governments to require evidence that a repair or reconstruction is related to storm damage and removes the broad standing for injunctive relief that is currently provided under Senate Bill 180. All good things. But regarding the prohibitions that were retroactive to August of 2024 through October 2027, this bill would only shorten those to June of 2026. The bill has cleared its first two committees in January, and we're just waiting for its final stop in rules. Two bills that we let you know about in the preview were House Bill 217 and 218. They were filed by Panhandle representatives. They're very narrow in scope, though, so they would just exempt out those counties that were overall not impacted by Hurricanes Debbie, Helene, or Milton from the prohibitions on more restrictive or burdensome regulations, but they keep the prospective portions of Section 18 intact. Sorry, I'm having some troubles here. Subsequently, after our last preview, House Bill 1465 was filed by Representative Alex Andrade, also from the Panhandle. This bill, unfortunately, doubles down on the worst provisions of Senate Bill 180, broadly defining restrictive and burdensome, expanding the civil action allowances, and requiring local governments to authorize permits for less restrictive regulations that were in place before a storm. So overall, we would typically say that we would be opposed to this. But because a bill has to be heard at least once to be considered for a floor vote in either chamber, last week we asked you to reach out to legislators and request for House Bill 217 to be placed on the agenda for its first stop in House Intergovernmental Affairs Subcommittee, and subsequently to amend that bill to match Senate Bill 840. You listened and sent hundreds of emails. Unfortunately, your legislators did not, and the House did not place either House Bill 217 or the more concerning House Bill 1465 on the calendar for this week. This is really a letdown for us because time is running out for the bills to be heard at all, much less amended, and to make it through each of their committees. The House seems to be playing an unfortunate game with our local controls, and unless leadership steps in, we may not be able to see this resolved this session. Moving on to topics and bills that are new this session, we're generally going in numeric order for the rest of the presentation, starting with the lowest bill numbers for each of the set of the companion bills that we'll discuss. So early filed bills, House Bill 105 and Senate Bill 588, prohibit Florida counties, municipalities, and special districts from enforcing certain regulations that are deemed arbitrary or unreasonable in court. They establish legal remedies for affected parties and preempt conflicting local laws. We were very concerned about these early on, but an amendment clarified some of the intent. So really, at this point, we're just watching them. The sponsors say that the intent is to reduce regulatory oversteps, but we worry that they would undermine local authority in enforcing ordinance and cost taxpayers money by requiring those local governments to respond to unwarranted claims by affected individuals. So far, House Bill 105 has gone through all of its committee stops and is on to a floor vote, whereas Senate Bill 588 has yet to be heard. Another set of bills that we were really concerned about a month ago are Senate Bill 208 and 399, House Bill 399. They would have required administrative approvals for certain residential developments on 100 acres or less, regardless of their future land use designation, restricted architectural standards, and promoted potentially incompatible housing development adjacent to established neighborhoods if those neighborhoods had the same future land use category. Both of the bills have been significantly amended to remove the administrative approvals and now require local governments to try to mitigate any incompatibility of a proposed project adjacent to another neighborhood with the same land use in order to issue an approval. If they cannot come to terms, the local government must justify in writing why this can't be achieved. We were happy to see that compromise come together, but a provision in House Bill 399 that requires OPAGA to conduct a study of the impact of removing urban growth boundaries on growth, economics, and environmental protections, possibly setting the stage for legislative efforts to nullify these types of boundaries in future sessions, still remains. And the bill goes even further by stating that simple majority votes are required for transmittal on any future land use amendment. This would invalidate any local provisions for supermajority or majority plus one vote on land use changes, which are generally enacted by local governments to protect rural areas. So we're opposed to House Bill 399. Both of these bills have been heard in 2 of their 3 committees. Sorry, yeah. And then moving on to Senate Bill 214 and House Bill 273 would expand the types of funding, benefits, and programs available to special districts in rural counties, including special districts that provide water and wastewater. Both of these bills have been heard twice. And then Senate Bill 250 and House Bill 723 are the rural community economic bills that Paul mentioned earlier. They've emerged this session as part of the Rural Renaissance from last session. In last year's session, we supported the Rural Renaissance bill that established an Office of Rural Prosperity to help with community planning and funding opportunities. This year's bill is a little bit watered down version of the original, and some groups have raised concerns about the focus on funding transportation infrastructure that might result in roadway expansions to open up rural areas to increase sprawl. We mentioned before that the House version contains prohibitions on additional land acquisitions in rural counties that already have 40% or more of their land in public ownership. Worth noting, as Paul mentioned again, Senate Bill 250 had only 1 committee stop and was passed by the full Senate during the first week of session, whereas its House companion has yet to be heard at the first of 4 assigned committee stops. 2 bills we're paying very close attention to are House Bill 299 and 354. These define new projects as blue ribbon projects, similar in size to developments of regional impact from many years ago, but with none of the oversight. Essentially, these would be developments that are 10,000 acres or more, where 60% of the land is set aside as reserve, and 40% of the land is eligible for development at up to 12 units per gross acre. A recent amendment to Senate Bill 354 requires the Department of Commerce to do the initial review and requires impacted local governments to sign off on these projects, but it handcuffs both state and local agencies' ability to deny an application on any meaningful grounds. It also includes ridiculously short timeframes, 45 days for the Department of Commerce to review, including feedback from other agencies, and 15-day reviews by local governments. Local governments have to hold a workshop, but there's still no future land use or zoning change required. There are some criteria, including that 20% of the housing qualifies as affordable and that they're new urban design, creating walkable communities, but no true standards for what this means practically. The new language allows these developments to be 60 miles from any interstate exchange, state, or railway, essentially in the middle of nowhere. Could be the last remaining old Florida that the sponsors claim to want to protect. This would result in entire cities on massive amounts of land approved with very little public input, regardless of proximity to other urban areas, and the burden will be on the taxpayers dealing with these massive sprawl developments. As we've stated before, there is already a process for streamlining approvals through sector planning in Florida, so we're opposed to these bills and hope that reason prevails this session. House Bill 299 has passed its first committee, and 354 is up in its second committee tomorrow. Moving on to a couple of impact fee bills by North Central Florida legislators. They define plan-based methodologies and thresholds for determining extraordinary circumstances for increasing impact fees. Under Senate Bill 548, a local government would have to demonstrate that they meet at least 4 of the 7 scenarios listed here in order to increase impact fees under extraordinary circumstances. The bills also reduce the voting threshold for exceeding impact fee phase-in limitations from unanimous approval to a 2/3 vote, and restrict the use of data older than 4 years, and offer certain fee deductions when calculating these increases. House Bill 1139 would also place limits on the duration of interlocal agreements to address transportation impacts. As it seems to be the trend, they entitle prevailing residents and business owners who challenge local governments or special district impact fees to reasonable attorney fees and costs. House Bill 1139 is ready for a House vote, and Senate Bill 548 has been heard in one of its committees. Agricultural enclaves from last session are back. This session, the mechanism to identify agricultural enclaves is switched up a bit. Under Senate Bill 686 and House Bill 691, property owners would be required to bring their proposals to the local government for certification as an agricultural enclave. The local government would then have a whole 30 days to verify that the properties meet the definitions in statute and schedule a hearing to certify the property. If they don't approve or deny the certification within 90 days, the shot clock runs out and the property is automatically certified. Once a property is designated, a property owner can bring development plans to the local government consistent with the residential development entitlements of any adjacent parcel. The local government has to treat it as a conforming use, and if it abuts an urban service area, it has to be treated as if it's inside the urban service boundary. Both were amended to ensure that they don't apply to areas of critical state concern or the Florida Wildlife Corridor, but we still worry about locally designated agricultural areas such as Marion County's Farmland Preservation Area and the Orange County's rural boundary. There's also a provision that any rural study area that would have had residential uses can qualify as an agricultural enclave, which seems like it would apply to certain areas in Orange County at least. Overall, again, we're taking the community out of community planning and essentially granting administrative approvals of potential large-scale developments. The bill reverts back to existing standards in 2028, but we're hearing that that might be removed in future hearings, so that's no surprise. We're opposed to the bills, but both have made it through 2 committee stops with 1 more each, and we're hoping that the sponsors can make some significant changes.
Sounds like that's poorly named.
Now highlighting the Department of Commerce bills just because they relate to the state's land planning agency, but they mainly deal with military installation buffers, the requirements for community block development block grants, and giving the Department of Commerce broad rulemaking authority for overseeing that program, as well as mandated use of E-Verify and various penalties and enforcement mechanisms for employers who don't comply. Both of these have been heard in their first committees. House Bill 927 and Senate Bill 1138 expand the private provider for development review policies of the state. We already have policies in place that allow private providers for building safety reviews and inspections, but these would require local governments to establish policies for outside contractors. We're concerned that the bills have the potential to circumvent quasi-judicial authority of the local governments, and the House version contains a broad preemption on any environmental regulations that exceed state law. An example of this might be a spring overlay zone or a wetland buffer at the local level. And each of these has been heard once. We're going to continue to monitor them. That wetland buffer or the exceeding state law regulation, environmental regulations was just heard, I believe, a week ago. And so that bill needs to be heard again. House Bill 979, Senate Bill 1434, which weren't filed yet in our preview, are next. These bills are intended to make it easier to develop environmentally impacted parcels like brownfields in Broward, Miami-Dade, and Palm Beach counties, the 3 counties with populations greater than 1.475 million people and 15 municipalities. So they're very limited. These contained pretty broad exemptions in their first iterations, but they've been amended to ensure that the parcels will be within an urban growth boundary, maintain the average rather than exceed the adjacent parcel residential densities, and have some minimum setback requirements to protect single-family home neighborhoods. These aren't perfect bills, but they are certainly a step in the right direction to acknowledge the surrounding community when the legislature creates preemptions in these types of regulations. I wanted to move on to a couple of bills that we talked about in the preview, but either don't have a companion or haven't moved in either chamber. House Bill 337 and Senate Bill 852 would allow local governments to incentivize small grocery stores in food insecure areas. We supported this bill last session, even though local governments presumably have the ability to do this already. There doesn't seem to be an appetite to take up bills that would offer local governments more flexibility in regulating the mobile home parks. These would have allowed local code enforcement officers to bring citations to mobile home park owners for certain building and land development code violations. And finally, no Senate companion to the effort to consolidate the state's water and soil conservation districts this year. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Chad. He's going to take us through the affordable housing and transportation bills that have been filed so far.
And then over on the other side by Brown Lake Park, whatever that is, by the ball field.
But the state defines it as more than half a mile to a grocery store?
I don't know, it's half a mile.
Oh.
But I just know that those are more than half a mile, and that
Okay.
that is considered a food desert by people in the affordable housing. And for, yeah, that genre of-
All right, thank you so much. Kim, once again, my name is Chadwick Leonard, Conservation and Planning Advocacy Coordinator for 1000 Friends of Florida. So far during this legislative session, we've seen measures in both chambers to attempt to address the issue of affordable housing. I'll be going over a few of the bills that we have been monitoring based on our legislative priorities. House Bill 313 and Senate Bill 48 started off as identical bills seeking to streamline the process of building accessory dwelling units. Early in the process, Rep. Nix's bill was amended to include by right approvals of accessory dwelling units. Senator Gates' Senate version has also taken on a few amendments and now exempts certain local governments from creating required accessory dwelling unit ordinances. The House version of this bill has been heard in one of its 3 committee references, while the Senate version of this bill passed by the Senate and is awaiting to be referenced to the committees in the House chamber. We are monitoring this bill because we know that accessory dwelling units provide a good option for affordable housing, but there are concerns about the preemptions in this bill and what it means for local governments. House Bill 675 and Senate Bill 756 was introduced to create more opportunities for affordable housing by requiring the lowering of income from 30 to 50 years. Sorry about that, for affordable housing eligibility, and exempting first-time home buyers from documentary stamp taxes. According to Leader Driscoll, she introduced this bill because many Floridians are struggling to purchase their first home. Home ownership in Florida has become increasingly out of reach, with only 20% of buyers currently entering the market for the first time. The House version of this bill has made it through one of its committees, and the Senate version has yet to be heard in any of its references. Senator DeSigley's measure, Senate Bill 752, taxation of first-time buyers, is measured to address the difficulty of becoming a first-time home buyer in the state of Florida. It also seeks to eliminate documentary stamp taxes and also reduces closing costs. This bill has no House companion, and as of today, this bill has not been heard in any of its committees that have a reference to in the Senate. The next bill is House Bill 755 and Senate Bill 934. They are targeted as areas of critical state concern. Bills are aimed at easing delivery of affordable housing in the Florida Keys and other designated critical areas while maintaining a dedicated conservation commitment there. The bill authorizes local governments to adopt an ordinance granting an ad valorem tax exemption and the affordable portion of certain newly constructed projects. And it creates a specific pathway for projects in those areas of critical state concern. As of now, the House version of the bill has been heard in 2 of its 3 committees, and the Senate companion has been heard in 1 as of today. Senate Bill 962 and House Bill 837 seek to clarify affordable housing statutes by excluding farms, farm operations, and associated on-site sales, packaging, commercial / industrial, and mixed use definitions. This limits the use of state preemption on agricultural lands. It aims to protect farms from automatic residential conversion. It promotes compact infrastructure, efficient urban development. It also strengthens agricultural zoning integrity, and the bill supports farmland, open space, and resilience. The Senate version of the bill has made it through two of its reference committees, but was temporarily postponed yesterday in the Senate Rules Committee, while the House version has made it through one committee so far. Now we're going to talk about House Bill 1143 and Senate Bill 948. These bills seek to expand what is considered the Florida Starter Homes Act. They seek to expand home supply by sharply limiting local regulation of small serviced residential lots and speeding development approvals. It significantly alters community planning by overriding many plan-based density, design, and parking controls. Land use authority is preempted in this bill through statewide minimums and strict scrutiny of local regulations. 1,000 Friends of Florida is opposed to this bill due to the nature and the amount of the preemptions for local governments in the bill. While we understand and support the need for more affordable housing in the state, we feel that this solution falls short of what is best for local governments and residents in its current form. The next bill is House Bill 1389, which mandates local governments to permit affordable multifamily housing in commercial and transit accessible areas and remove certain zoning and parking restrictions to support this goal. It enables tax exemptions for affordable units while advancing housing supply and smart growth principles. It restricts local planning authority and lacks environmental safeguards. This bill does not have a Senate companion and will be heard for the first time today in House Housing, Agriculture, and Tourism Subcommittee today for its first stop. So that'll be heard today. The next bill is going to be House Bill 1183 and Senate Bill 1342, which is known as the Transit-Oriented Development Act. Much like the one bill discussed before, this bill aggressively preempts local zoning to require dense mixed-use parking-like development around transit with nearly identical height and FAR floors and strong TOD entitlements. The House bill goes further because it adds what's considered livable urban villages, also known as LUVs, areas. It uses rights-based findings and imposes a strict compelling government interest litigation standard, expressly waives sovereign immunity, and omits comprehensive plan integration. The Senate bill narrows this scope to TOD zones. It also strengthens definitions and by right procedures, ties transit-oriented development zones to comp plans and future transit expansions. It slightly improves historic preservation flexibility and includes severability. The House version of this bill has not been heard in any of its committees of reference, and the Senate version of the bill has been heard in one of its committees so far.
Livable.
Yeah.
Also livable.
Okay, now House Bill 1493 by Rep. Dottie Joseph enables local rent control, establishes land banks, restricts corporate ownership of single-family homes, and incentivizes adaptive reuse and resilient housing. It advances community planning by supporting infill development and housing affordability, positively influence land use through equitable property redistribution, and promotes conservation through the redevelopment and resiliency of tools. This bill has yet to be heard in any of its committees of reference, talking to Rep. Joseph, she named it Real Affordable Housing Relief Act because it puts the control back into the hands of the citizens and back into the hands of the local government to develop affordable housing in a more sustainable way.
That's like a thing for the.
The next bill is going to be Senate Bill 1520 by Senator Alexis Calatayud. Senate Bill 1520 modifies property tax exemption rules for affordable housing, restricting local opt-outs, and protecting in-progress or approved multifamily projects. This bill is currently scheduled to be heard tomorrow in its first committee of reference. And then we have a similar bill that we have opposed, which is yet another bill by Senator Calatayud. And it should be noted that she has been working on changes to the Live Local Act in the last few sessions. In this bill, it broadens the mandatory zoning for qualifying affordable rentals, including on public/school land. While it attempts to promote infill, it reduces local review of height, setbacks, and compatibility, and further preempts comprehensive plans and discretionary approvals while rendering commercial/industrial to capture by right zoning and exclude farms. 1,000 Friends of Florida is opposed to this bill due to the local preemptions on local governments and its possible impact on comprehensive planning regulations. This bill has been heard in one committee of reference and does not have a direct House companion at this time. Now I'm going to go over a couple of the transportation bills that we have been monitoring. The first bill is going to be House Bill 97 and Senate Bill 324, which allows small Florida counties to maintain existing transportation service levels rather than for 5-year needs, risking long-term infrastructure inadequacy. It may hinder sustainable community growth, promote inefficient land use, and increase environmental degradation through sprawl. The House version has made it through 2 of its committees, while the Senate version has yet to be considered in its respective chamber. The next bill is going to be House Bill 53 and Senate Bill 1254. It authorizes Florida to join a multi-state compact, creating a Southern Rail Commission framework to study and advance interstate rapid passenger trail with discretionary state funding. Community impacts are mainly planning related, potentially enabling multimodal connectivity and evacuation resilience. The House version of this measure has been heard in one of its 2 committees, while the Senate version has yet to be considered.
All right,
Yeah.
that's what I expected.
Not gonna happen.
The next set of bills takes on the issue of data centers. Due to the proliferation of artificial intelligence and the increasing need for data centers, we have seen and heard the governor lay out his vision for how data centers should be developed and maintained in the state of Florida. These bills take similar but also divergent approaches in an effort to address data center concerns. House Bill 1517 mandates public environment and infrastructure disclosures from data centers, promoting transparency and community participation. It supports sustainable community planning by requiring impact reports on energy, water, and noise during the data center application process. This bill seeks to protect land use integrity through zoning and incentive transparency while advancing environmental conservation through emissions and waste reporting. This bill has not been heard in any of its committees and does not have a Senate companion. The next bill is going to be hyperscale data centers, House Bill 1007. It creates a statewide framework regulating hyperscale data centers defined as data centers using more than 25 megawatts. It bans these facilities from agricultural, conservation, environmental stewardship, mixed use, and residential plan categories, and from agricultural zoning in unincorporated areas. It also adds 500-foot landscape setbacks and restricts siting near agricultural, recreation, conservation lands, and state waters. It strengthens comprehensive planning by requiring state coordinated review, adding the Public Service Commission as a reviewer, and eliminating small-scale amendment shortcuts. It mandates extensive public notice hearings for local approvals and water permits, creates a governor and cabinet citing board veto, prohibits public incentives and limits ratepayer cost shifting, and adds noise and insurance provisions. This data center bill also has no Senate companion and has not been heard in any of its committees.
You couldn't do that administratively. You'd have to.
The next bill is going to be Senate Bill 484 by Senator Brian Avila, entitled Data Centers as well. Senate Bill 484, data centers, is a data center development by mandating local planning authority, utility cost accountability, and strict water usage oversight. It preserves community planning rights, enhancing livability and infrastructure control. It impacts land use by closing loopholes and reaffirming zoning consistency. Environmental provisions prioritize reclaimed water and deny harmful uses. This has been the more promising data center bill at this point in the legislative session. It has been heard in 2 of its committees and is awaiting consideration in its final committee, which is Senate Rules. This bill, Senate Bill 1118, is what we call a linked bill, which means it's directly related to the bill before it, which was Senate Bill 484. It has the same enaction dates and the same effective dates, and it is inside of it is part of that bill based on the confidentiality part. So for this bill, is directly linked to the previous bill, and it creates a 12-month public records exemption for pre-application data center siting, communications, and protections for proprietary business information, with a 2031 sunset and contingent effective date. Senator Avila has stated that this bill is to deter local governments from signing NDAs with data center developers while attempting to maintain confidentiality and transparency. This bill has taken the same path as its linked bill and is waiting to be considered in its final committee, which is Senate Rules for both of those bills. So we're continuing to pay attention to both of those bills. With that being said, I am going to hand it back over to Paul.
I wonder what data center means, like if it has to be a certain
Yeah,
square footage
how
or,
big?
the other one said megawatts, right? And then this one,
Yeah, what, I don't even know how big 25 megawatts is. What does that mean? Nobody knows.
So I could go to the conservation bills, but Kim, were you going to do the water quality or resilience bill?
I'm teed up for those if you'd like.
Yeah, why don't you get to those and I'll conclude with the conservation bills.
Okay, that sounds good. And before we get to the water bills, which I'm going to share here in just a second, I did want to address some of the affordable housing bills that we just discussed. In their current form, we're saying that we're opposed to them primarily because they are just these broad exemptions or broad preemptions on local governments, without considering kind of community character or infrastructure limitations or needs of those types of projects. And so we're hearing that for the most part, the sponsors are open to working with us and others, and we're actually in communication with a few of them. So as the session moves on, we're hopeful that they can get into a position where we can support them, because 1,000 Friends of Florida has always been supportive of affordable housing projects and absolutely supports density where it makes sense. So I just wanted to kind of frame that up towards the end of our discussion on the affordable housing bills. But
And Kim, I'm just going to jump in and dovetail on what you just said. Some local governments undoubtedly need to do more to promote and allow affordable housing within their borders. I think part of the problem with the bills that we're opposing is the way that they currently stand. They would overwrite some very promising initiatives that some local governments have taken to expand affordable housing, force them to start over. They would treat everybody the same. So they would penalize some local governments that have been out front and forward thinking in their affordable housing measures. I'm thinking everywhere from some relatively small local governments like Crestview or Crystal River to bigger ones like St. Pete or Tampa. It's the one size fits all approach in these bills, and the collective penalizing of all local governments for the lack of action from some local governments that creates a problem.
yeah, and like I mentioned before with the Rep. Barrero and Senator Claudio bills on the infill redevelopment, where there's some consideration for the surrounding area, those are a great way to kind of thread the needle between making sure that local governments are promoting infill where they need to, but then also respecting those limitations that exist. So that's just kind of where we stand as far as the work that we're doing this session. But moving on to the water bills that we are tracking, I wanted to say that the overall message here is probably going to be that the legislature isn't doing much on water quality or quantity this year, but they are looking for ways to address biosolids, which we'll talk about in just a few minutes. So House Bill 230.
Oh, no.
Oh no, I pulled it off of here, drat. Okay, I was putting it so we could ask you questions. All right, we'll just go here.
The House version of the bill has not been heard, and the Senate version may be its first committee so far.
We don't have much left, but now we can ask them
Regarding our
questions.
plastic containers bills for the session, Senate Bill 240 and House
And now it's
Bill
close to that. Is this
525
recording?
Preempt local governments
Okay.
from regulating auxiliary containers. But
Okay,
they
let me make
direct the
it big.
Department of Environmental Protection to develop a uniform ordinance for use and disposal, which includes
Wait,
local input.
I'm already in. Where am I?
That local governments might.
okay, this could
they are-
close.
Would be able to adopt and enforce. They also allow certain local restrictions to remain, and importantly, they direct DEP to create a statewide marine debris reduction plan that addresses plastic and polystyrene in marine environments.
How do we make this big?
Conversely, House Bill 629 and Senate Bill 766 also restrict local regulation of auxiliary containers, and they allow, but they don't
Maybe
direct
questions?
DEP to adopt regulations within state parks. They also don't include the uniform ordinance or marine debris removal provisions from Senate Bill 240 and House Bill 525. So we have two good bills and two not so good bills on the similar subjects, but the short of this is that only one has been heard in committee so far, and that's Senate Bill 240. So we're gonna need to see how these shake out in the end. House Bill 479 and Senate Bill 718 are repeats from 2 years ago, where we saw an effort to preempt local governments from adopting policies related to water quality or quantity. This would have been a broad preemption on any local controls over water quality and quantity. Luckily, or perhaps not luckily, House Bill 479 was amended before its first committee stop to state that a local government may not regulate adjacent upland activities outside of a wetland buffer. This is super confusing because it seems as though it was intended to limit the scope of the bill to wetland buffers, but it actually does the opposite, or possibly has the opposite effect by preventing any upland regulations. So we're gonna need to see what the next amendment looks like if it gets another hearing. Another unfortunate provision in these bills would be the elimination of the Water Management District Land Management Review Teams. House Bill 479 has been heard once, and Senate Bill 718 has not gotten a committee hearing just yet. So I'm going to tell you about House Bill 611 and Senate Bill 508, but they also aren't moving. They would codify irrigation restrictions and irrigation construction and installation standards into state statutes. These are issues that are typically handled by local building or land development codes. They're site-specific, they're community-specific, and they would probably have penalized those local governments that are doing more than what would be required in the bills in terms of irrigation practices for water conservation. House Bill 669 and Senate Bill 1042 are this year's efforts to increase testing and reporting of potential health hazards at public beaches. Shouldn't be something that's too controversial. Last year's version was overwhelmingly approved by the legislature, but was vetoed by the governor, and these bills aren't going anywhere so far this session. So then we have 4 bills that deal with perfluoroalkyl and perfluoroalkyl substances. They would establish a statewide a way to address forever chemicals, broadly referred to as PFAS. They would allow DEP to implement screening and targets until the EPA sets those standards, ensure existing grants can be used to clean up PFAS contaminated sites, and place restrictions on when firefighting foam containing PFAS can be used. Despite having spent a lot of time on this topic during committee weeks discussing PFAS, the legislators haven't even looked at these bills in their first committees.
Containing added PFAS.
However, 2 very limited bills are moving, and these deal with just that
Look at that, the
firefighting foam
Republican bills are
and the
moving.
PFAS in that. They, House Bill 1019 and Senate Bill 1230 are similar, but not exactly the same. Essentially, they'd limit aqueous foam containing PFAS to emergency use only and direct the DEP to assist with the cost of phasing out its use. They also require large wastewater treatment facilities to periodically test wastewater effluent for biosolids for PFAS. So we're supporting these bills primarily because of the measure that would require the testing for biosolids.
Wait, biosolids and PFASs?
And then speaking of, there are a few biosolids disposal
PFAS
bills
is in
floating
the
around that we
biosolids.
should discuss this morning or this
Opposite,
afternoon.
yeah.
House Bill
Okay.
1245 and Senate Bill 1294 seek to place some guardrails on how Class AA biosolids are disposed of
That's
and ensure a
interesting.
level of monitoring and record keeping that currently isn't in place for biosolids treated to that Class AA designation. They deal with specific record keeping and application standards depending on whether the material is marketed as fertilizer or disposed of as a waste product. And then House Bill 1285 and Senate Bill 1474 are much narrower in scope. They essentially limit land application of Class B biosolids if a facility that provides higher treatment, presumably to Class AA, is within 50 miles of the source.
So we currently
Paul
spend
is
about
going to talk about this
50,000
session's
a year
FDAX bill, the
to rid of our
Department of Ag and Consumer
solids
Services bill.
in a
But I wanted to note that biosolids are addressed in that bill as well, with a provision that you would only be allowed to land apply Class AA biosolids after July 1st of 2028 if a plant is hauling over county lines, and 2031 if they're applying it inside their own county. None of these would establish a reporting or monitoring criteria for the Class AA biosolids. So biosolids management has kind of taken a front seat this section. There seems to be a recognition that we can't just move away from Class B biosolids land application without having a better framework for monitoring and regulating those Class AA biosolids as well. So all of the bills, I just kind of took up a little bit of time in this because all of the bills that I just mentioned are moving. A couple of them have already been heard twice, so we're going to keep tracking them and let you know where they end up. The last few bills we're monitoring that deal with water are unfortunately not moving yet. House Bill 1167 and Senate Bill 1468 have been around before. They would require DEP to do some additional reporting on wastewater treatment facility performances and operations and prioritize upgrades. We are supporting those bills, but again, they're not moving. And then you might remember a few years ago when we brought together a panel of experts from around the state to come up with recommendations on how we could solve our water quality issues that were causing blue-green algae outbreaks, harming our water bodies, leading to vegetation, fish, and manatee die-offs, and generally hurting our economy. Well, Senator Smith thought that he should remind his colleagues about those recommendations and maybe do something about it, but he doesn't have a House companion wanting to do the same, so this good bill has not moved this session. And then finally, a few resilience-related bills that we're keeping our eyes on. Senate Bill 302 and House Bill 1035 were not matched up when they first were introduced, but now they are. These would allow certain dredging practices focused on restoration in the Biscayne Bay, but they also direct FDEP to develop a statewide standards for rules and a statewide program for nature-based coastal resilience projects. We are supporting the bills and are happy to see that they are on their last committee stops. Senate Bill 636 and 1297 aren't quite the same, but essentially they're aimed at streamlining designations for critically eroded beaches if they meet certain criteria and have designated local funding sources. They also allow DEP to require strategic local beach management plans focused on flood risk, property impacts, sensitive lands, and engineering solutions, and integrate those plans into the state's long-term beach management framework. Senate Bill 686 specifies that low-lying inland areas repeatedly impacted by seawater breaches can be designated as areas of critical state concern. We let you know about House Bill 751 in the preview, and it looks like this has been rolled into this year's DEP omnibus bill. Would add coastal resiliency initiatives to the list of projects that are eligible under the public-private partnerships programs. The projects could include things like living seawalls, land acquisition, and stormwater drainage projects. Senate Bill 992 now has a companion, House Bill 1305, and this would provide tax incentives for buildings that meet LEED certification. LEED stands for Leadership in Energy and Environmental Design, and the designation indicates that the building or community has met certain standards for sustainable design. The bill gives tax credits for up to 5 years with an annual cap of $50 million per year for the program, but neither of these bills has been heard yet. A pair of bills that would designate coral reefs as critical natural infrastructure and elevate DEP's authority to protect them are Senate Bill 1422 and House Bill 1319. We're supporting these bills because they acknowledge the role that natural systems play in resilience efforts in the state. Senate Bill 1422 has been heard by one committee, but the House companion has not yet been heard. And lastly, just an update, none of the insurance-related bills that we addressed in our preview have been heard yet this season. As Paul mentioned, doesn't seem to be a desire of the legislature, so it's unlikely that they'll get through committees in time to be heard on the floor. And so that wraps up my presentation. I'm going to hand it back over to you, Paul.
1:06. Got 20 minutes maybe to go. Usually they started with questions. Do you guys have any questions we should type in? I want to know about the ADUs, so that one's a no.
Oh, okay, yeah, okay.
Anything else? No? Okay. It's so fast.
That would be
Okay,
restricting the
hopefully
ability
you
of
all
local
can see my
governments to
screen
regulate
again.
ADUs, is that what-
Looks
I'm
good.
gonna- Great. I'm going to conclude with the short list of bills we're following in the conservation category. First on our list is a pair of bills we're supporting. Representative Kim Kendall of St. Johns County is sponsoring the House version of the bill to require more public notice and information, creating more transparency and accountability for proposed sales or swaps of conservation land. Senator Debbie Mayfield of Brevard County is sponsoring the Senate version. Rep. Kendall has written that she filed the bill in response to the narrowly averted swap last year of 600 acres in the Guana River Wildlife Management Area in her district for scattered parcels in 4 counties. The pending swap was publicly revealed only a week before State Acquisition and Restoration Council members were scheduled to review it. Well, a public backlash was enough to defeat the swap. Kendall said the episode highlighted gaps in procedures to protect conservation land. The details of her proposed improvements are on this slide. The House bill has already been approved without any opposition in its 3 committees and is awaiting a vote on the floor. The Senate bill is advanced without opposition in 2 of its 3 committees so far. Here's another pair of bills we support. They would require the development of a plan to restore the Ocklawaha River. This would mean breaching or removing its dam built 6 decades ago for the Cross Florida Barge Canal, which was never constructed. These bills call for convening groups of stakeholders to establish recreation and economic development plans for the region. Ideally, this planning process would allay the objections that opponents of Ocklawaha restoration have used for years to block efforts to breach or remove the dam. 1,000 Friends is a member of the coalition that has been working to restore the Ocklawaha. It's important to keep in mind that the governor vetoed a line item in the budget last year that would have provided funding to begin Ocklawaha restoration. And he has said in recent weeks that his position hasn't changed. However, last year's approach only provided funding and didn't call for the stakeholders council that includes representatives who have opposed restoration in the past. We are hopeful that will be enough to change the governor's mind. Now to some bills in the conservation category that we're opposing. Senate Bill 290 and House Bill 433 are wide-ranging bills with statutory changes sought by the Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services. There are a number of controversial provisions in these bills, like the so-called veggie libel provision, which was removed yesterday. But from the Senate version, it's still in the House version at the moment. We're most focused on the provisions relating to land use. One provision would rule out development on ecologically significant parcels in low-density municipalities, which certainly sounds positive, but this is another one-size-fits-all planning mandate, which could apply even to small parcels with entitled development and infrastructure to support it. As usual, the devil is in the details. But the deal breaker for us in one of our priority areas is a provision that would require a state review of conservation land purchased after 2023 for possible sale to convert them to agriculture. It would direct the proceeds from any sales to the Department of Agriculture to finance the purchase of development rights to preserve other working farms. I've already said we're supporters of the Rural and Family Lands Protection Program, but not to the point of turning other land protected and promised for conservation into a funding source. State parks, wildlife management areas, and state forests would not be reviewed for conversion to agriculture under this provision, but other conservation lands, like lands owned by water management districts or managed through agreements with local governments, could be taken, including lands with high ecological values or popular public uses. This could negatively impact restoration for the Everglades, Indian River Lagoon, or natural springs. We don't believe support for Florida agriculture has to come at the expense of conservation. Both are important goals and can coexist. They should be seen as partners in protecting high priority land from development, not rivals. SB 290 was approved yesterday in the third of its three committees and is awaiting a vote in the full Senate. HB 433 has been approved in two of its three committees. Another pair of bills we oppose would require state conservation lands to be leased for cattle grazing where land managers find them suitable for that purpose. Again, we believe a healthy Florida agricultural sector is vital to our state's economy and the preservation of high priority undeveloped land. But as legislative analysts of this bill have pointed out, livestock grazing can create negative impacts on land, including increased runoff and erosion, water contamination, and disruption of sensitive ecosystems. 3 water management districts have programs that allow limited grazing on public land, and cattle grazing is authorized in 5 of Florida's state parks. But we're concerned that this bill takes too heavy-handed an approach to expanding this practice. It could have negative impacts on already impaired waterways and limit public access to state lands. The Senate version of this bill has been approved in all 3 of its committees and is awaiting a floor vote. The House version has been approved in 1 of its 2 committees. My next 2 slides will be available on the PowerPoint that is placed at our website after this webinar is put online, permanently archived online. I'm going to skip over them because I'm concerned about having enough time to address some of the questions that we would like to get to. So with that, we can get to questions, Haley.
Great, thanks, Paul. Let me replace the screen share. Great, thank you everyone for your attention, and thanks to our presenters. We're going to jump into the question and answer period. Thanks to those that are already putting your questions into the Q&A box. We've got dozens of them already coming in. As a reminder, please indicate, if possible, who the question should be addressed to, and please keep your questions as succinct as possible. As a reminder, professional certification credits are available for those who've attended this event live. This information will again be available on our website and in the PDF of the presentation.
There will be a brief survey sent out after the webinar. You'll get that by email. We appreciate you participating and providing us some feedback on how we did. We've got upcoming webinars. The 2026 legislative wrap-up will be on, I've got the dates wrong here. That will be in March. I apologize. How can you sign up if you don't know the date? Our website, it's up to date. The registration link is live. We will take a look at all the bills that passed, failed, and where we ended up. As Paul alluded to at the beginning of the presentation, hopefully the legislature keeps things in their window and we don't go over session too long. But we're gonna plan ahead as if the legislature will wrap things up in a timely manner. We also have an upcoming webinar in May, From Swamp to Suburb, the true cost of wetland loss in Florida. We hope you'll sign up today. Finally, these webinars are supported by our generous donors and members. You can help support our work by making a donation or becoming a webinar sponsor. You may designate your gift for the DeGrove Webinar Fund. Please reach out if you'd like more information. All right, now with that, if I could have our panelists unmute and turn on your video, and we will start with questions. Paul, I'm going to direct the first one to you. We had some folks join us a little late and wanted a quick recap on property taxes. What's the status on property tax bills, and what do you think is going to happen?
So here's just a
Absolutely
brief
nothing.
recap. The House has been acting on this, the Senate has not. The House's approach, they have, I think, 7 different proposals, but the chairman of the committee that was formed for these has said they are probably going to be combined into just 1 or 2 proposals. Generally, these proposals exclude public safety and schools from property tax cuts. So it won't be they won't be proposing an outright elimination of
So if you
all
make
property taxes.
a
But the
special
Senate
fee
and the governor have yet to clarify exactly where they stand. If I had to guess,
Whatever
I
exemptions they were
think
talking
this is
about would only go
probably
on the
headed for a special session. I don't think that they're gonna have
School board, but he
enough
said public
time
safety.
or
So he
space
means
to
that.
address this before the end of the regular session.
We'll
Got
have
it.
to officially talk
Thank
about
you for that.
afterwards.
Kim, we've got a question about HB 399. And I'm trying to remember, that's not Blue Ribbon Projects, is it? It's regarding the Pinellas County Charter giving the Board of County Commissioners final approval over some local government future land use amendments. Will HB 399 invalidate that authority? That's kind of a nuanced
Yeah, no,
question.
it's not actually, it would, 399 says that any, like, if you have a local government that requires a majority plus 1 or a supermajority vote for any specific land use amendment, then that would be nullified. But your typical, county approvals typically will just require a majority vote to, change that future land use. So that's where, it's really those communities like Orange County or Miami-Dade where they have a majority plus 1 or a supermajority that are required for certain land use actions.
There was discussion when 399 was in committee from one of the members as to whether or not the bill would not only preempt local ordinances, but would preempt local charter amendments, and the answer from the sponsor was that it would.
Got it, thank you. Chad, this question is for you regarding the ADU bills, the accessory dwelling unit housing bills. Could you please, you touched on this a little bit in your presentation, could you give a brief update on whether there are matching bills, so if they have counterpart bills in the chambers, and how far they've moved? Are there any that are making significant progress?
So those 2 bills are the only ones that are close enough to each other to be considered companions, and they still don't perfectly match up right now. One of the big differences is the 30-day minimum of rental, Senate Bill 48, it has that minimum rental that's allowed to put in an ordinance, but it does not have that in the House version of 313. And right now, Senate Bill 48 has moved all the way through the Senate and is awaiting messages in the House. But House Bill 313 has only been heard by one committee thus far.
Interesting.
And
Great,
of
thank you.
course, the 30-day limit is meant to prevent ADUs from being constructed just to be used as vacation rentals. The point is, if you require at least a 30-day lease, you expand the supply of affordable housing. If you don't, you risk people building ADUs just for vacation rentals, which really doesn't address the point of the bill.
Thank you.
There's
Paul, this one's for you regarding conservation funding. You put those numbers into perspective at the beginning of the presentation, just 0.1% of the overall budget going towards conservation. As we head into the final weeks of legislative session, what should we be watching most closely in the budget when it comes to land conservation?
Well, we may get the answer as soon as tomorrow. I think the real bellwether will be to see how much the House is willing to dedicate to Florida Forever and to the Rural and Family Lands Protection Program. Last year, they were a lot more generous for the Rural and Family Lands Protection Program than for Florida Forever, which they almost proposed to zero out. The Senate ended up raising the number to 18 million. But that'll show how difficult the battle is going to be to try to approach what the governor proposed, the 115 million for Florida Forever. Again, we support a generous funding for both of those programs. We consider them both important to preserving high priority undeveloped land in Florida.
Great, thank you. And I don't think I can hold out on these questions any longer. I'm intentionally saving them for last, but wanted to shift gears, talk about the Senate Bill 180 Fix campaign, 1,000 Friends of Florida, along with our partners. We've been, like Kim mentioned, working on this since last session, trying to fix the bad elements of Senate Bill 180. So there are several different types of questions related to this topic in the chat. I'm going to start with, we'll go round robin here. Given where Senate Bill 840, that's Senator DeSigley's bill, and the House bills that Kim talked about, given where those stand right now, what is Thousand Friends focused on in the remaining weeks of session? Are there any remaining paths forward, and what should our members be doing? So let's start with Kim, and I'll go to Paul, and then Chad. Yeah, we're talking about this a bit internally. We're just asking, we're going to try to keep the pressure on. We've seen it work in the past. We're just making sure that our legislators, our representatives know what our priorities are, prompt them to do something that might have been unexpected. So we're hopeful that we see some movement in the next couple of weeks. We are halfway through, but we're only halfway through, so there's still time. And I'm going to jump in. Sorry, Paul. So status-wise, there's Senate Bill 840, which has been, as our members have seen, a bill encouraged to get heard. It's headed to its final committee, correct? Mm-hmm. And there is no House counterpart, right? There's no identical House bill that matches 840. Kim touched on this in her presentation, so I encourage folks to go back and look at that slide. And Paul, I'm going to skip you, go to Chad. Procedurally, Chad, we can't speculate too much on what this legislature will do, but are there creative solutions that the legislature could try to pursue? What kind of things could happen if our members keep up the pressure?
Yeah, so I think there are a number of options that are at the disposal of the legislature. I think it's just a matter of what they'll do. I think the most regular option, according to the rules, is to bring some of that language from the bill that's been heard into other bills. The problem going to be with that is that it has to be in the same chamber, right? if 840 gets all the way through the Senate and then it's referenced in any committees in the House, that's something that may help. But with it not having a direct Senate, direct House companion, that's going to make it a little bit more difficult for it to move because they have to cross those lines. So it can do that. It can be chopped up into other bills and separated. As long as germanity is not an issue, which means it must take on the same issue in the same way that is being discussed in that bill. So they can't just throw it in whatever bill that they want to. It actually has to be a part of that subject. So those are the most common ways that we've seen things that's been considered zombie bills that people thought were dead and came back to life later on. So we're just doing our best to monitor if any of those are options and if anybody's going to be taking those options as they start meeting on the floor more often and as they start looking to kind of shore up what everything is going to look like.
Thanks, Chad. Paul, anything to add? Yeah, they did a good job.
Yeah.
With that, I will add, a huge thank you to all of our members who've sent emails and made calls. We're able to track how many of you all have acted on our action alerts, and we're approaching the tens of thousands of emails sent over the course of this last 6 months regarding fixing Senate Bill 180. Every time there's been a push, a focus, a committee that we've needed your calls and emails, you all have come through. With that being said, and I think Kim touched on this, your calls and emails are going out, but they are not being listened to. So that is certainly a takeaway point here, and I think we all should probably be pretty frustrated by that. We're getting close to the end of our webinar time. I'm going to head to a closing question, trying to end on some optimism here at the midway point of legislative session. So legislative sessions come and go, but the work of local community planning, it doesn't. That's every day, whether or not the state is in session. As we head into the second half of Florida's session, how should advocates be thinking about this moment, not just in terms of restoring community planning and the Senate Bill 180 campaign, but in terms of protecting the future of community planning more broadly? So, big picture question. We're going to go
My question was
backwards. Kim, Chad, and then Paul.
You should
Well,
keep
that's
doing
not
all the
backwards, but I'll
stuff.
go.
Yeah,
don't lose
heart. It's gonna be okay.
The glass half full portion of this
they answer,
preemption
maybe?
or the kind of standstill on local government planning is that the planning for the plans can still happen. And so one of the things
Yeah,
that we're
we
seeing
can
is a
still
lot of
control it.
preemptions and folks saying, hey, we don't have enough
Keep on
developable
trucking.
land. Our local governments aren't acting to promote infill. And so if you have an opportunity to sit on a board with your local government or be engaged in those meetings where these types of plans are being discussed, be there and promote the infill. Sometimes we have to step back and say, it doesn't. If, the NIMBYs are not getting anywhere in Tallahassee, and so we have to be a little bit more open to ideas of how to maximize the investment that our local governments have made in the infrastructure that we have and try to direct growth there. Thanks, good answer. Chad.
What?
Yeah, so
Boy.
I would say that this work is, like you said, it's year round, but I think it's also important to know that just because something doesn't pass this year or just because a measure that you like doesn't pass this year, does that mean you can't work in the meantime over the summer, after session is over, meeting with your elected officials at home, talking to them about what their plan is for the next session, getting that language to them that you think will make the bill better. I think in the work that we do when it comes to planning and when it comes to comprehensive planning, this legislative part is year round, just like everything else. So if there's a bill that you thought should have gotten more attention, if there is some language that you thought would have made the bill better, it's always the time to start those
I think it's
discussions.
sloppier.
Like you see, what
They
we're in the
totally
Senate,
coordinated
it's
the
back
background.
in a
Tree
different
in the
form,
water.
right? Whether folks like the
It's a
current
water oak.
form or not.
Water oak.
Just because it didn't pass last year doesn't mean that, Senator,
Yeah,
President
it's
Albritton
shallow.
didn't bring it back. So just always
Temporarily
keep
flooded.
that top of mind and do like you're doing now, take notes, gather information, so that when this time comes, we can continue having these conversations.
Thanks, Chad. And Paul, take it away.
So, A lot of the bills that we've referred to, one of the features of the bills that we referred to with the preemptions is administrative approval. And what that means is basically developments are approved without public hearings or public comments. And we've got a problem with that because, as Kim said in her presentation, that takes the community out of community planning. We believe for 40 years there has been a system which is based on the principle that public scrutiny and public comment leads to better planning, and communities that respond to the needs and the priorities of their citizens. And that's, I think, a fundamental principle that shouldn't be discarded, even in the face of needs like, the desperate need for more affordable housing. I agree with Kim that local advocates of affordable housing and infill development and all those things that we have supported for so long really need to engage in the planning process at their community level to see that priorities like that can be achieved. We don't need to throw the baby out with the bathwater at the state level and prevent those important discussions, deliberations from taking place at the local level.
That's right. Well, thanks again to our presenters. We're out of time. I appreciate everyone's attention and attendance today. Have a good rest of your day. Thank you.
Oh, they still didn't answer it. Maybe I'll send him a note. Okay, so did y'all hear what he said about they carved out first responders? So
Yeah, so would they like prorate your budget?
yeah. So the problem is the state will allow counties to have a fire fee and a law enforcement fee. So even if
Are you talking about fee or are you talking about millage?
so at the county level,
yeah.
so I think the county would have to switch from a millage-based way of assessing to a fee-based way. That's what the question was, is like, are they saying that the millage doesn't count as if, the millage doesn't count against the county for police or fire as long as they put it in a silo? So if you operate those like enterprise funds, then you know that everything collected that's allegedly for law enforcement really stays with law enforcement, and same thing for fire. So the county does that for the fire side. The city's allowed to do it for fire, but not for law enforcement. But if the city does it for fire, and we charge a millage, it counts against our 10 mil constitutional cap for how much tax we can charge altogether. If we do it with a fee-based system, where it's not related to the value of the property, it does not count against our 10 mil cap. So cities could switch, like, what would happen if they actually eliminated property taxes and also said you can't not have police and fire? So if the state won't allow cities to collect some other way and they don't replace the revenue, we would have to stop having our own police department because we don't have a way to pay for it, but the county does. So the county would then, even though they have declined to do it so far, they would have to create a police district, treat it as an enterprise fund, collect money for it, and operate law enforcement everywhere, because cities have not been statutorily enabled to create a law enforcement fee. And we have a fire district that's not funded here, but if we can't charge millage and we can only charge a fee,
Yeah, that's fee
and there's
only,
no
yeah.
political will to charge a fee, because then people who have been homesteaded a long time end up paying 10 times as much as they used to pay, because it's a fee and not a tax, air quotes for all of this. Then the better scenario, the better outcome is if the county's allowed to charge millage to continue paying for fire in a way that everybody is used to, then that would also go there. So on these air quote municipal service issues, police, fire, roads, stuff like that, the county is allowed to charge 10 mils under Florida's Constitution for things that are county level things, and 10 additional mils for a total of 20 mils for things that usually cities provide. So police, fire, sidewalk district, road district, stuff like that. So the count, like, at the end of the day, where I think this is going is they're trying to make it so counties exist and cities don't.
You think they're trying to, you
Oh,
think
yeah,
they're
I
trying to
think-
push cities out of being able to fund themselves?
Yeah, I think so. Because I had conversations with some people in Tallahassee about like, hey, you know, if you do this, 6 of one, half dozen of the other, but you need to make a way for cities to fund fire, or to fund police departments. And the feedback was, well, that defeats the whole purpose. Like, and I was like, well, what's the whole purpose? They're like, well, to lower taxes. Well, how do you lower taxes? Well, you stop having a city double charge people for law enforcement, because we pay full freight for the sheriff, and we pay full freight for the Oviedo PD. So we don't get certain services that the sheriff provides outside city limits, because we also pay for our police officers to provide those services instead. So, I've got some friends who live outside city limits, and until like 2 weeks ago, he's like, wait a minute, you don't get a discount on your property bill for not getting door-to-door service from the sheriff? And I'm like, no, we pay full freight, man. And he's like, well, that doesn't seem fair. And I have to clap, because that's not it's mathematically not fair. So, that's my diatribe on that. And it says nothing about whether I favor or don't. Hey, welcome to the discussion. Yeah, so you missed the whole thing about.
Did you watch it?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
They didn't answer my question about.
They answered the first one.
Yeah, okay, we'll do like a little
The
circly
ADU
work.
one was hers.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay,
Because I didn't know for sure.
Yeah,
What
they
was
didn't
going on with
really,
that?
they really didn't hit on it.
Well, I guess one of them's only moved one, the house side has only moved the one click up, so it's probably not going anywhere this year. You gotta talk louder though, because this is like being recorded.
Oh,
Have you met our city manager before?
I don't think so. Hi, I'm Dean.
Nice to meet you, Dean.
Just-
Dean?
Alan. Good to
You
meet
look familiar, but maybe.
I don't
at
know.
some point.
I attended one of your city council meetings once.
Okay.
But yeah, I don't know whether, I know what you would know me from. I teach economics at UCF.
Oh, cool.
I was giving an exam this morning, so I couldn't get here.
I've seen you around on Facebook. I'm Megan.
Oh,
Hello.
yeah, that's- yeah.
I think the important thing on that, or at least what I'm seeing, people are building ADUs so they can empty nest into it
Mhm.
and then rent the big house.
Yeah.
And the other thing, but one of the things